They are turning out to vote. We talked to our audience, and over 97% are planning on voting. Doesn't mean they're necessarily excited about who they are voting for, but I think there's a big misunderstanding about this audience, that there's apathy within this audience, and that they're not planning on turning out. I think there's a real distinction between whether or not they're going to actually show up and whether or not they're excited to show up.
Well, we've seen registration in droves, including via the skim. You guys have 110,000 people that have registered to vote just through the skim. How did you do that?
We are so proud of it. I mean, as you said it, millennials make up a huge part of this voting bloc. They're about a third of the voting population in the U.S. That is huge. So as a company that makes it easier to be smarter, as a company that focuses primarily on female millennials and getting them information, we knew that, from looking back over the past year, we had to make get out the vote and voter registration essential part of our company, and we did that by teaming up with Rock the Vote. We've gotten over 110,000 people registered to vote. That is amazing, and now we're going a step forward, making sure that they have buddies, making sure that they have a way to get to the polls, making sure that they know what to bring, making sure that they're prepared so that 97% that intends to vote actually does vote, which I think is really key.
And I think also of the 110,000, we should say over 95,000 are women, which is obviously such a huge market for who the candidates are trying to reach.
Now, Carly, I wonder how representative your readership is of millennials at large, because by definition, they're people who really want to be informed, perhaps more than the population at large. So I wonder, did you see any kind of shift that you were able to track over time in enthusiasm, given that so many millennials were excited about Bernie Sanders and then seemed to sort of fall off the map after it was clear that he wasn't going to be the Democratic nominee?
We definitely did see that shift. I think what's really interesting is nearly 60% of our audience is going to vote for Hillary Clinton. That is not because 60% of our audience is a registered Democrat or was supporting her from the beginning. So a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters ended up crossing that line over to support Hillary, but also a huge amount of Republicans and independents are now supporting Hillary in this audience. So it's been really interesting to see how that shift has happened. And I think it goes back to kind of the overall message is that 40% of this audience is really upset about who they're voting for. And so again, I think it's really important to note that they are in many ways kind of begrudgingly voting for Hillary, but they're voting for her.
I was going to say, on the one hand, you hear women say, I'm empowered by Hillary being the first female president I'm voting for, or as Susan Sarandon said over the weekend, in different terms, I don't vote based on my gender, right?
Well, I think for us, millennials have kind of reflected a national trend that people tend to be voting against another candidate, and that is very true with this bloc. So there are a lot of reasons why millennials are turning out to vote for Hillary, but I think for us, when we look at it, it's mainly to block another candidate. And when we did our survey of our audience a few weeks ago, we saw that actually the same amount of female millennials that are going to vote for Trump are actually the same amount looking at third-party candidates. So I think we see a lot of frustration with who they've got, who's in front of them, and a lot of frustration with what they're actually going to get out of these election results.
Carly, you mentioned that the lion's share of your readers support Hillary Clinton, but that's not because they're registered Democrats. You think about the one issue that connects all millennials being student debt, but socially and fiscally, what other issues do they care about, and how do those party lines get drawn?
It's a really interesting question. So when we first started these efforts, we sort of just assumed that our audience would care about social issues first. And we really were incorrect in assuming that. And I think a lot of people assume that that is what this audience cares about. When we talk to our audience, and we've actually just wrapped up a campus tour, we were all over the Midwest and the Northeast, in talking to these students and in talking to millennials as a whole, and honestly just talking to our friends as we are millennials, what we've seen is that the number one thing for them is the economy, is international security, and worrying about student loans. This is an audience that is inheriting a tremendous amount of debt, that Social Security, while they might not be, not a sexy term to talk about in your 20s and 30s, it's something that's coming up, and it's something that I think the economy matters so much to this audience, I think more than their parents probably realize it matters to them.